day and welcome everyone to this open seminar hosted by the Institute of International Affairs and the EU Info Center in Iceland. My name is Solveig and I will be the moderator here today. This is the first seminar in a new lecture series this academic year that will focus on contemporary issues in the European debate. The next lecture will take place next week at this same location at the same time in this room. It will focus on mass migration in the Mediterranean and the dilemmas facing policymakers with regards to Schengen. I also want to mention that the Center for Arctic Policy Studies, which is a part of this institute, is hosting its annual Trans-Arctic Agenda Conference tomorrow and on Wednesday. And please check the Institute's website for further information on this. Now, we are very lucky to have with us here today Dr. Cyrille Toplak, Associate Professor at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. In her work at the university, Dr. Toplak focuses on, for example, the history of the idea of Europe, third world politics, political communication, as well as a course that, judging from the mystical name it has been given, I would love to follow, that is Foundations of the Modern World. Now, before working at the university, Dr. Toplak was the director of the Institute of Ethnic Studies in Ljubljana, and before that, counselor on European affairs to the President of the Republic of Slovenia. Dr. Toplak has studied and given lectures on European affairs in France, where she studied for many years, in Norway, and in the US, Hawaii being a place that I particularly envy her to have been to. The title of Dr. Toplak's lecture is Small States in Europe, Slovenia and its Position within the EU. In her talk, she will focus on the question whether smallness affects the way in which smaller member states of the EU approach their European policy. Now, this is a very interesting topic, of course, as always, for Icelanders that have yet to deliberate which way they want to go in answering the big EU question. Now, Dr. Toplak will speak for about 30 minutes, and after that we will hopefully have time for some questions and answers. But without further ado, Dr. Toplak, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this warm welcome, despite the cold and atmosphere. A small state, but not such a small attendance. I'm really grateful for that. So my today's talk will be on the situation, or particular situations that small states encounter in their EU policies and their position within the EU structures and decision-making processes. But in order for me to explain that, I think a short introduction explaining Slovenia in general a little bit will work. So let me start with that. I'm certain you know that Slovenia is pretty much right on the other side of the European continent from the perspective of Iceland, that is in Southeast Europe, surrounded by Italy, Croatia, Hungary, and Austria. Four states that are very different but have something in common. They're all much bigger and politically more important in the region or in Europe as a whole than Slovenia. And that, to begin with, informs to an important extent Slovenia's political culture, Slovenia's political history, and also Slovenia's self-perception within the concert of the EU member states. So, for quite some time, Slovenia, as one of the new member states, have been considered a success story. And I'm questioning this despite the obvious facts. Slovenia was the one that most famously seceded from the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in the early 90s, that is without serious military conflict. and introduced also quite successfully and swiftly parliamentary democracy after the accession to the independence. Then, almost 15 years later, Slovenia was the most prepared new member state to enter in what was called the Big Bang enlargement in 2004, became member of the monetary union, that is, adopted the euro instead of our currency in 2007, entered the Schengen area, that is, opened the borders completely at the same time, and also became a member of the NATO alliance, OECD, as well as presided as the only new member state, as the first new member state at that moment, presided the European Union in 2008, and was also, as I mentioned here, a member of the United Nations Security Council. So these are, we could say, quite important and impressive achievements, but there is a but. Slovenia, just like other post-communist European countries, went through a very complex process that we call democratic transition, and in a few words means a transfer from a planned economy and one-party socialist political system with all its institutions to market economy and parliamentary political system with a number of political parties and all the accompanying democratic institutions. Decision for that important change was made by Slovenian people in the late 80s, and that was the process that actually informed Slovenian domestic but also foreign policies in the decade and a half or so to follow. After 2004, however, we might say that Slovenia, in a sense, has landed where it wanted to be, and the political agenda of Slovenian political class importantly changed, or I would even argue almost disappeared. What happened is that Slovenians very much turned onto themselves under the state umbrella of the European Union, and in a situation that they were very much accustomed to, because Slovenia has never been an independent state in its history before 91. It has always made part of much larger empires or much larger states, and Slovenians were always used to having their political center somewhere outside Slovenia. Now, again, that important center taking all important decisions became, of course, Brussels, and Slovenians could concentrate on their domestic quibbles and struggles and processes that I mentioned here, that I call ideological introversion, and that basically mean that in our political life, our political communication, our political behavior patterns, we actually went back in time to 1920s and 30s, and in some respects even to the 19th century. And that shouldn't be considered a big surprise if you are willing to see the very project of creation of a nation state at the end of the 20th century, quite an anachronistic political project. So we got our nation state, and we went through all the problems that nation states had to go through. Only most of the European nation states did that in the 19th and early 20th century. So what is particularly important here for our discussion of Slovenia's position among small states in the EU is the absence of a political agenda that follows the 2004 accession. It is now Brussels that, as I mentioned, takes all the important decisions, and the Slovenians really are no longer responsible for themselves, which is really, in a sense, a tragedy for our collective political mentality, because we have never been responsible for ourselves. And there was this really short period between 1991 and 2004 when we really had to take care of ourselves. And now, once again, we have this EU umbrella and the feeling, maybe false feeling of security, and we are really concentrated on our inner or domestic political situation. With regard to everything else, we just follow what the large EU states decide, or just what the EU decides in general. Our transition has gone into a direction that is not very beneficial for Slovenia in some other respects as well. We have not been able, in the 25 years now, we have not been able to restore a really working parliamentary democracy. I would argue that we have simply not had enough time for that, because Slovenia has no democratic tradition, no state tradition in its national history. So what we managed to restore is what I call a planned partitocracy. That is a political system with democratic institutions where the balance of power is importantly imbalanced, and the executive power is absolutely the most powerful one compared to the judiciary and the legislative power. Political parties, we have quite a lot of them. Some of them are the parties that can show some continuity with the Yugoslav communists on the one hand, or even Slovenian political parties from before Yugoslavia, the early 20th century. In any case, political parties are really having the excessive impact on decision-making processes and the executive power. And I'm calling this a planned partitocracy as an analogy with planned economy. That is, we have a lot of infotainment from the side of political class, but behind the curtains, of course, there is an ongoing consensus between the so-called opposition and various coalitions in power on all the most important domestic political matters. So it would be, for now, really difficult to speak about a working parliamentary democracy in Slovenia, and it falls into a category of flawed democracy anyway in various classifications of democratic political systems. Now, from the economic point of view, that's really important because it's so intertwined with politics. We also haven't really managed to install a working market economy. Once again, there was no tradition and we need much more time. And it's really important to understand that we adopted a new economic system at the time when the neoliberal paradigm was really on the move in the world. So that was our idea of market economy that we adopted, and of course we also adopted all the negative consequences of that way, along with very severe economic crisis in the last few years. What we managed to do in this process, however, is that we deconstructed the welfare state that we inherited from the previous socialist system, and that the state today is really considered by an average Slovenian as some sort of enemy, as some sort of entity that tries to take away from people as much as possible and not take care of people, as we were used to from the previous political and economic system. And that's why I call this change going from a welfare state to a warfare state. That is, people from the point of view of taxes and social services and employment seem to be almost at war with their supposed to be the so I'm coming here to a very important point with regard to our self-perception, also within the European Union. That is, from what I've said, I think it should be quite obvious that for Slovenians the state is a very specific abstraction, and that we have a lot of issues understanding the state as us. We do not think of the state as the community of us. We think of the state as of some alienated abstraction that has been for most of our history outside Slovenia anyway. Slovenia has been, Slovenian lands have been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for centuries, so Vienna was the center of power that we referred to. Then it was Belgrade, of course, in the first half and for most of the second half of the 20th century. And Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, should be the center of power now, but of course it's Brussels that is considered as the center of power, and the political class in Slovenia always or tends to make Brussels responsible for all negative and negatively perceived political measures that need to be adopted in Slovenia, which is not something that would be really particular and happens a lot in other EU countries as well. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the state, as we conceive of it, is somewhere else, and Slovenians do not take the responsibility for their own state and their own community in a way people do in those political communities where there is what we call the state tradition in their national history. And of course, that was my first point here actually. Since Slovenia is surrounded by much larger neighbors that in our history also, at least for some of them, tended to threaten Slovenians in their very existential survival, or at least cultural survival. The Slovenian community developed very particular behavior patterns towards the others with the capital O, these others are today, when Slovenia is a sovereign independent state, also within our community, not just outside, but we tend to consider that way the foreigners, the immigrants coming from former Yugoslavia, the minorities that are particularly numerous, that are of Austrian or Italian or Hungarian origin. They all seem to threaten us, although we are in the European Union, the borders are open, we are free to go anywhere, we just don't, but we also do not want the others to come to Slovenia. Really sorry to say that. It's of course a generalization, but not an exaggerated one. So, to finish this short presentation, Slovenia is a very classical imagined community, according to Benedict Anderson's theory on imagined communities. And what I find particularly interesting within this theory still, in the case of Slovenia, is how inventive we are in actually creating borders where there are no borders left. And today, we at the Slovenian Academia discusses at length what we call the mental borders. And these are really the hardest to get by because they're very abstract, and we can just stay within them forever if we feel like it. So, in this complex situation, I have decided to describe a specific case from which I think that Slovenia's position and also self-perception within the European Union is going to be quite clear. Actually, two cases, but I think I won't have time to describe the other one. That may be the topic of my next talk tomorrow. So I will start by the European Parliament elections into the European Parliament earlier this year. And so just the facts to begin with. The elections were in Slovenia on the 25th of May. I think it should be noted with regard to the turnout that we had to go to the polls 4 times this year. We had the EP elections, we had parliamentary elections later in July, then we had local elections, and we also had one referendum, so a lot of voting. But we started out by the European Parliament elections. We had seeming important choice. We were able to choose out of 118 candidate lists, we only have, of course, according to the proportional system within the European Parliament, 8 seats. So a lot of competition, and the results were as followed here. Slovenian Democrat Party at the moment was the main opposition party, and it got 3 seats out of 8, which was, of course, interpreted as a huge victory in Slovenian politics. And that's one element that I want to point out that actually is very apparent with every European Parliament elections, that the results are interpreted as some sort of sign or announcement or an intermediary test of the government's popularity in Slovenia. And the European Union doesn't really matter. It comes only second. What matters is which party won in Slovenia, because this is about Slovenia primarily. New Slovenia and Slovenian People's Party are 2 conservative parties, small parties, that actually joined to present a common list, and also got 2 seats. And then Social Democrats got 1, lost 2, and were like the big losers of this election, and they were also one of the coalition parties at the moment. The same for the Slovenian Retirees Parties, 1 seat. This is not an error. We do have a Retirees Party. It's actually a lobby that presents itself as a political party and really takes care. Its sole agenda is basically to take care of retirees and make sure that they don't lose their benefits and they stay high on the government's agenda. So they got 1 seat as well, and that was for the first time, although they exist for 20 years. And the I Believe Party also got 1 seat. That party was founded only a month before the elections, and got 1 seat for the president of the party, who used to be quite an important figure in Slovenian political life because he was the president of the Court of Accounts and quite an influential figure then. So he managed to get a good job in Brussels, left, and his party no longer exists. Didn't even present itself at the parliamentary elections in July. So that was quite a specific phenomenon related to the EP elections. Campaign emphasis, as I'm mentioning here, was really on national interests and on domestic party struggle. I already explained the second point. The first point is simply about orienting the campaign agenda within Slovenia to Slovenian national interests and seeing the candidates only through the prism of how are they going to serve Slovenia as the members of the European Parliament. Now, there are 2 really important issues with that. Slovenia has not yet defined its national interests, so we're always talking about something really abstract, and we don't really know what this national interest in question is. And of course, it depends whether we make part or we feel closer to the conservative political agenda or the so-called, I would not call it leftist, liberal political agenda. There is no left in Slovenia right now. This is then the issue related to the national interest. And of course, that is also plainly anti-European, not understanding what the European Union is actually all about, to only seek what you can do for Slovenia when you are a member of the European Parliament, instead of understanding that this is about governing the European Union and the European Union as a whole. But we have here a projection of the general idea of the Parliament and of the legislative power that is now only projected onto the European level, because in Slovenia also the members of the parliament are considered or judged as to how much they can do for their constituency, or even for their village or their small town, because only a few years ago we finally managed to ban the members of the parliament also being mayors at the same time. We had a huge, huge problem with that, because those mayors that were in the parliament actually only lobbied for their really particular local interests. So we have then this clear focus on national interest, although they are not clearly identified. And of course, the role of the media here was also very important, because the campaign confrontations that were organized by the public TV or private TV stations, and were of course largely viewed by the Slovenian public, they were once again presented in the form of infotainment, with a clear accent on making it as sensational and conflicting as possible, avoiding the real European policy issues and really discussing what matters for Slovenia, and unfortunately not even what matters for Slovenia, what matters for Slovenian political parties. So this is what European Parliament elections look like in Slovenia. And in the presentation of my talk, it was also said that this year was quite telling for Slovenia from the point of view of its perception in the EU and also its self-perception. And that was, of course, not just because of the elections, but also because of the creation of the new European Commission, where Slovenia played quite unexpected and interesting part, having a commissioner, a candidate for the commissioner that got refused, and we had to find a second one, a new one. But since I'm supposed to talk only for 25 to 30 minutes, I may reserve that issue for tomorrow, or maybe in the course of the Q&A session say something more about it. So thank you very much.